Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, July 20th, 2006. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, joining me from Basic Brewing Video is my good buddy Steve Wilkes.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on the radio edition of Basic Brewing.
Oh, well, thanks for coming on. Usually when you and I get together on this show, we are like in a coffee shop or out on the porch, out on the patio, or somewhere interesting where we can talk, but it's just too doggone hot. So we're here in the air conditioning.
We're not on location today.
No.
Live in front of the house.
We are located in the studio.
Yeah.
Because it's just too darn hot.
It's too darn hot.
And talking of hot, it was warm in Florida as well when we went down to the National Homebrewers Conference.
It was very nice. Very sunny Orlando.
And we came back with lots of interviews.
Boy, I learned so much.
Yeah. It was great, and thank you again for going with me down there, because there's no way that I could have covered it like we did together by myself.
It was a great experience.
If you'll ignore that sentence structure there.
I'll ignore it.
But what I want to do in this show is go through some interviews that we had with homebrewers.
Mm-hmm.
Both, we found some homebrewers just kind of wandering the halls and hanging around the hospitality suite. And we also talked to some homebrewers that gave formal presentations in sessions as a part of the conference.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just knowledge everywhere you look.
It was a plethora of beer knowledge.
Well, what I want to start out with, when I went to the Great American Beer Festival last year, I came back with a love of and an appreciation for sour beers.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this time, on this trip, I gained an appreciation and a new love for chili beers.
Yes.
There were a bunch of chili beers down there.
Oh, boy, there really were. There was the beer that we had from, was it the Dunedin Club?
Yeah, the Dunedin guys with their chili bitter.
Chili bitter dry hop with Serrano chilies.
Uh-huh.
Golly, that was good. Then we had a smoked chipotle porter from another club.
Yeah.
And a habanero mead that would just knock your socks off. I mean, both in that it was very good and in that it was very hot.
Yeah, it's definitely what you'd call a palate cleanser.
Boy, that's no kidding.
Kind of like Drano,
but addicting.
Yeah, kind of like Drano is a pipe cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
But we were able to one of the first chili beers that we tasted was this chili bitter from these guys Butch Luxemburger and Dave Morgan, and when they brew together, they bill themselves as Dutch Morgenburger. From the Dunedin Brewers Guild in Dunedin, Florida. And what are we drinking here?
That's our Serrano chili bitter. So it's an English bitter with dry hop with Serrano chilies.
Now, this is a wonderful beer.
It's a very good beer. And I'm a big chili head, too. New Mexico and all that stuff. And this is just outstanding.
You'll have to come back when we put the Chipotle Northern English Brown on.
Oh, you're killing me. You're killing me.
We just did a pepper fest 2 weeks ago, and we had 4 different pepper beers. We had a banana Hefeweiss, poblano wit, a habanero stout, and a chipotle brown 2 weeks ago. So this is leftovers from the pepper fest.
And then we did the Serrano chili. This is the first time using the Serranos. We usually use the super chilies, but the Serrano has a lot better flavor to it. So you get the pepper flavor and a little bit of the kick from the Serrano.
So how big are the batches that you do at once? 5 gallons? You do 10 gallons? What do you do?
We've gone up to 60 gallons, but we'll do a base beer and then do them different ways. We've also done bitter one year where we did a mild, a medium, and a hot. And we used poblanos and Anaheims in the mild. We used green super chilies in the medium, and then we used the red super chilies in the hot.
Typically, we'll brew 15 to 20 gallons at a time.
So you could theoretically split it up into smaller carboys and what's your strategy on dry? It's not dry hopping. It's dry peppering. What do you do like for a 5-gallon batch? How many peppers Does it matter on which kind?
Depends on what kind of heat you want. And so got to first pick out what kind of beer is going to be your base beer, and then that's going to be a big factor on your heat. So if you got a darker beer, those are generally going to handle the heat better. Like our habanero stout, we did a nice big chocolate stout and then added the habaneros, where you don't get the flavor with the habaneros, but you get the heat factor.
Now, how many habaneros would you use, say, in a 5-gallon batch of beer? Would you use 1 habanero? 5 habaneros?
4 to 5, I would say.
For about a week, and then we pull them out.
We test it during the week, see where the heat's where we want it, and pull it out. It does mellow out after a little bit of time.
So how do you prepare them? Just in whole?
I blanch them for about 30 seconds to 3 minutes, depending on the thickness of the skin. Soften them up, then I slice them up, put them in a hop sack.
So they're easy to pull out after that?
Yeah.
How did you get into this?
I was growing my own peppers, and I went to a pepper festival, and I said, give me a pepper that I can fit in a beer bottle. So I did the Thai Suns, and I made like an English bitter, and I just dropped the pepper in each bottle, and then as time went on, it would get hotter and hotter and hotter until you couldn't drink it. Then someone in our club works at the nursery where we do the pepper festival, so she's like, promote the club, go ahead and make some more pepper beers. And it just started out a little thing. We made 2, and then the next year we made 3, the next year 4, and like last year there was 7, I think. This year we were back down to 4 solid.
Amazing. Those chili bitter.
Absolutely amazing.
We're going to have to make some of this.
We're definitely going to make some of this. So you dry hop it. I mean, it's not, you don't put it in the secondary. I mean, it's...
Well, we put, just right in the secondary.
But I mean,
just,
okay.
And put it in the keg for our secondary. Drop it in so you can pull it out real easy. And we just... carbonate it up, check the heat level, because the longer you leave it in, the hotter it's going to get. But if it's a pepper with no heat, you really don't need to worry about it. If it's a poblano or an Anaheim, but some of your banana peppers are going to heat up, your habaneros for sure. Your chipotles, you get that smokiness flavor. If you break them up and put them in there, you'll get some of the heat too.
So I think a chili beer is in our not-too-distant future.
I believe so. I can see a really nice Mexican dinner coming along when we make our first one. And in fact, I've got some chipotle peppers that my brother made for me. We might want to try doing the porter.
Oh, yeah.
I think that would be a capital idea.
Maybe we could try to smoke some grain and do it as well. So we have the smoked pepper and the smoked grains.
I love it.
Yeah. Now, we did make an ancho chili mead. We're in the process of making that. We haven't checked on it lately, but on the subject of meads, we talked about in our video on meads, on Basic Brewing video, braggots. Mm-hmm. We mentioned braggots, which
is grain and honey.
That's right, and neither one of us has ever made one. But just hanging around the hospitality suite there, we ran into Patrick Payne from Melbourne, Florida, and he's with the Central Florida Homebrewers Group. Mm-hmm. And he let us in on some ideas or some secrets to his award-winning braggot.
Yeah.
You were talking about your braggot. It was an award winner. It got 49 points in the judging.
Third best of show in the 2006 Buzz Off, and the judges raved over it, and it got 49 points, and it knocked me on the floor.
Was this the first one that you'd ever made?
This was the second time I entered a braggot, the second braggot I ever made.
Now tell us about the style. What exactly is a braggot, first of all?
A braggot is a mead that has malt in it. And, you can have a sizer, Melamie, or whatever, but that particular style, braggot, just has malt. So there's 2 different ways you could go about it. You could brew up a beer and put a lot of honey in it and end up with a braggot and brew it all at once, or you could do it the way I did it. And I actually did on this particular one, I did an orange blossom mead, which came out about 18%, and that one was about 6 months old. I used 3 different types of yeast on it.
Wow.
And I was, feeding it nutrients, and I hit it again with the yeast. It was really big mead, so it's when you got it that big and you want it to finish out in the right amount of time, you really have to pump the nutrients and the yeast to it, keep it going. That came out good, and I had also done this one I call Mama del Diablo. This was a Rochefort 10 on steroids. So it came out to be like 16%. The mead came out to be like 18%, and I blended the two together, and that's what I ended up with. So all in told, the Mama del Diablo had 3 different types of Belgian yeast, and the mead portion of it actually had 3 different types of mead or wine yeast in it.
Wow. So 6 different kinds of yeasts. And that's a huge alcohol content. So,
huge. So it was smooth, very smooth.
So what was your strategy on adding the yeast and the nutrient? I mean, did you start out with a fairly alcohol intolerant strain and then go to the more tolerant strain?
I actually ran all 3 yeasts at the same time. I'm not so smart, and because of my ignorance, I did it this way, because I know that some will start and run real hard, but other ones will finish the race. So I picked my yeast out like that, in the same way when I picked my Belgian yeast. Some of them will just start in the fermentation really hard, and other ones will dry out a beer. And obviously, when you're dealing with that big of gravity, you have to have something to finish it off.
So you pitched simultaneously.
Yeah.
And they just let them fight it out.
Right. Yeah. And I on the Mama del Diablo on the Big Belgian, I only pitched that one time, and she went all the way through. Then I actually warm conditioned it at 80 degrees in a keg. I call that my secondary, and it sat there for like 8 months. And it kept going because the pressure kept building up in the keg. So she was still alive and still gnawing away very slowly. And then the mead, like I said, that finished up pretty quick. Within a month, I had it finished, and again, I warm conditioned that one about 78 degrees, and she came out really nice. When I put the two of them together, I was just amazed how smooth it was.
So it's a style like mead in general that takes a lot of patience, a lot of attention.
Oh, yeah. Anytime you do any super high gravity stuff, you've got issues.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it. Congratulations. So Patrick went to a lot of work to make that braggot, and sounds like he was rewarded.
I think he was. It sounds like a quite an ordeal in some ways, but how rewarding would that be to have such a good brew when you're done?
Yeah, no kidding. The enthusiasm that Patrick had is kind of, from what we could tell, indicative of brewing down there in Florida.
It must be the sea air. There's something about it. We ran into a now friend of ours, Matt Riddell, who talked from Tallahassee, who talked to us about the challenges of brewing in Florida.
That's right. He's from the North Florida Brewers League, and about everybody that you ran into down there was connected with some sort of homebrew club or another. And so there are tons of homebrew clubs down there, and we were able to speak to a lot of them during club night. And if you haven't tuned into Basic Brewing Video, you should probably do that and download our video of Steve wandering among the homebrew clubs and sampling the beers. Quite a lot of fun.
Oh, I had a great time.
But a lot of enthusiasm down there. And again, like you said, we talked to Matt Riddell about the challenges of brewing down in Florida and down with the Florida heat.
I've been with the North Florida Brewers League for about four, almost 5 years now, and I've been homebrewing for almost 8 years. I'm a lot older than I look.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't look like were you brewing legally?
Yes, I was, as a matter of fact. So I've been homebrewing, like I said, for about 8 years. As soon as I turned 21, I went out and bought my first homebrew kit. So,
excellent. So homebrewing, first of all, I mean, there are a ton of clubs around here. Homebrewing must be pretty big.
It is. It's really phenomenally big. I was very surprised when I first started homebrewing and first joined a homebrew club how many other people were doing this fantastic hobby. It was very surprising to me because I hadn't heard a lot about it until I got in with the homebrew clubs and realized how many other clubs there are in the area, in Florida especially.
And down here in Florida, you guys face some challenges that other homebrewers don't face in other parts of the country. What have you got to deal with down here that others might not?
Well, it's hot. And and that's difficult for maintaining fermentation temperatures. The whole first part of brewing, the mashing, the boiling, all of that stuff seems to go pretty well. Especially the mashing, we can keep things warm pretty easily. We don't need a whole lot of insulation on our mash tuns. But when it comes to getting things down to fermentation temperatures, if you're using either an immersion chiller or a counterflow wort chiller, if the city water is 85 degrees, you're not going to get down to lager temperature anytime soon. So getting your wort down to fermentation temperature is probably our biggest challenge. And I've seen a lot of people do some interesting things as far as using two-stage chillers, using ice, pre-chilling their water for their chillers. Lots and lots of garage sale refrigerators out there that people use.
Yeah, are there? I guess refrigeration would be your best way of maintaining fermentation temperatures.
Absolutely, but a couple of people do get creative. I've seen more than one carboy sitting in a pool.
Well, there you go. Now, do you also do the wet T-shirt thing?
I started out doing the wet T-shirt with a fan on it thing, and it's so humid in Florida that the evaporation doesn't happen all that quickly, so it doesn't keep it as cool as you would want it to be. But it's just because the air is saturated with moisture all year round.
Do you see it where people get into home brewing and start with the low-tech kind of things, and then the longer they get into it, they just say, what the heck, I'm just going to bite the bullet and buy the gear?
Absolutely. And I think that especially brewing in Florida, people sort of bite the bullet and get the gear a little bit sooner. Like I said, I know lots of people that go to all the garage sales and scout out those used refrigerators. So, I mean, I'd say that people in Florida, for fermentation, get those refrigerators earlier than they do in other parts of the country, for sure.
Now, do you see an influence on the styles that are brewed? I mean, some people kind of avoid fighting the temperatures and kind of go with it and go with styles that are more friendly to the warmer temperatures? Oh,
sure, absolutely. I would say very few people in Florida actually brew lagers. Very few homebrewers in Florida brew lagers. It's so difficult to get down to temperature to pitch your yeast that most people brew ales. And I also think that the heat in Florida contributes to a lot of the styles that are brewed down here. There are lots of the lighter Belgian wits and Hefeweizens and things like that are brewed in Florida, as opposed to barley wines and old stock ales and things like that.
So in some areas of the country, the water styles determine the character of the beer. Maybe down here and the warmer climates around the world, because we talk to people all around the world, those warmer temperatures also affect the character of their beers as well.
Absolutely. Florida most of Florida has pretty decent water. We get a lot of our water off of the aquifer, especially up in North Florida where I'm from, and it's got really nice minerals coming off of that limestone. So it's really good for brewing a lot of styles of beers. And so the water style is not that big of a deal. It's really the temperature that affects the way we brew in Florida.
So how exciting is it to have the National Homebrewers Conference in your backyard here?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's really exciting. I mean, it's amazing to think that people are coming from all over the nation that are coming down here to enjoy the sun and enjoy the beer.
Well, now's your chance to show off.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Now, it gets hot here in the summertime in Arkansas. It's hot today.
Boy, it's really hot today. It's about 100 degrees out.
And the humidity is what?
I don't know, 138,000%. Don't try to dry anything out there.
No, it won't work. So it's tough to cool down the wort. For us, our groundwater gets up, and it's tough to maintain fermentation temperatures. We only get it for a few months I can't imagine the challenge of dealing with that all year round.
Yeah. Well, they've adapted techniques that, fortunately, I suppose we don't have to do. They have to go the extra mile, which makes their efforts all the more worthwhile, I suppose.
Yeah. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
That's what they tell me. And if it's not nailed down, paint it. Something like that.
True. Spoken like a man who spent time in the military.
That's right.
Now, those were our kind of informal conversations that we picked up. There were also homebrewers who made presentations to formal sessions in the conference. And let's start with one that you attended with John Peed, who's a homebrewer, on filtering beer.
Tell me why it would be important to filter beer, or why a homebrewer might want to do that.
Well, obviously, it's going to improve the appearance pretty much more than anything else you can do. It also, surprisingly, cleans up the flavor just as it cleans up the appearance. Most people think that you strip flavor and body out when you filter, but if you do it properly, you'll find that you'll lose very little.
I noticed in the samples that you gave us, and maybe not the most dramatic example, but I could tell that the beer was more focused and a little brighter flavor, even though, as you said, it had been kind of knocked around in the trip down here.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it cleans up the bitterness pretty much more than anything else. It seems to take tannins and maybe little hop particles out that may cling to the yeast cells. Something that it does, that it removes, actually takes the harshness out of the bitterness, and it gives you a nice, clean, crisp bitterness, which is more like commercial beer than you typically get with unfiltered beer.
And talk a little bit about oxidation. You mentioned the trials and tribulations about it. Tell me what oxidation is, and more or less what the flavor is in your palate, and what you do to avoid it.
Oxidation is just mixing oxygen in with the beer. Oxygen obviously is a component of air, so if you mix air into your beer, you'll get the oxidized flavor, which most people describe as cardboard or paper flavors. It always struck me as being kind of metallic, and to this day it does. But anywhere from metallic to cardboardy or papery is the sensation. It's a very unpleasant flavor and aroma in beer. You don't want it. And filter media is so porous and has so much area that there's an excellent opportunity to oxygenate your beer, to oxidize your beer, rather, if you get oxygen in the system.
Yeah, I was going to say that I took one of these tests one time where you had all the off flavors, and you flavored them up, and one of them was the oxidation, and it reminded me so much of the bad beer I would buy when I was a kid in a can, That's it. That's the beer I used to drink. Okay, so about how much money are you talking about? If you want to get into a filtering system like you use, which is the plate system, what kind of investment are you looking at?
That's a good question that I didn't cover. If you have, it requires a CO2 system, CO2 bottle, regulator, and kegs, because you're going to push the beer from one keg to another. If you're just bottle conditioning now, it's going to be a sizable investment. You have to have a keg system and a CO2 system. But if you have that already, then you only have to invest about $65 for the filter setup, and that's complete with hoses, connections, and everything. And then the media is typically $3.50 to $4 per 5 gallons of beer.
And so that's not a terrible investment, I don't think. For everything you might have going, I have a really simple system, and I bottle condition. I probably got $200 max in all of my stuff that I have. So that's not terrible. That's not a lot.
Well, if you have to go buy a gas bottle and regulator, and you're not lucky enough to get something pretty cheap, say on eBay or somewhere, and you have to jump into the whole kegging and gas thing, you're going to be looking at a few $100s. But if you already have all of the kegging and gas equipment, it's a really very minimal investment.
Now, I do bottle condition. So if I have the time to wait for the beer to fall bright and all of that sort of stuff and go, am I going to gain anything by filtering the beer?
No, I think if you're patient and you're willing to let your beer sit for, I found that 5 weeks was the minimum required for my beer to naturally drop bright and get rid of most of the harsh off flavors. So if you're willing to wait 6, 12, a couple of months, 6, 12 weeks, couple of months, 3 months, then you probably will come up with pretty close to optimum beer. It's not going to be quite as bright as filtered beer, but you'll have every bit of the rest of the characteristics. You'll lose you'll probably lose a little bit, pardon me, of head retention when you filter. I don't think you'll lose much malt flavor. I don't think you'll actually detrimentally affect the body. You'll lose some perceived body when you filter all the yeast out, but that actually adds clarity to the feel of the beer. One thing you might want to watch out for is filtering very heavily hop flavored beers like American styles, American IPAs. I've found that there's a limit to how much hop flavor that can be retained, but I've never had any trouble with malt flavor really. Like I said, head retention, it may be somewhat adversely affected. If you're probably the best thing you can do is be very patient and use beer that has dropped bright.
One of the things that struck me when I was listening to you talk about it was, since I bottle condition, one of my fears in taking bottles of beer to friends, putting it in the car, is that I've got that little layer of yeast on the bottom, and it's like I don't want to shake that up. It seems like filtering might help that.
There are two things that are just absolutely phenomenal about filtering. One of them is that you can be drinking pretty much optimal beer in about 10 days, and you can't do that unless you filter. Another is that you never have to worry about transportation again, ever. You've always got brilliant beer, and you can tip that bottle up and pour it the way you want to pour it, and no worries.
Yeah, when I share a bottle of beer with a friend who's not a home brewer and doesn't understand, it's like, let me pour that for you. Yeah. That's right. Well, it's just been a pleasure visiting with you this morning, and I appreciate so much the information that you've given us here and then all of our listeners around the world.
Well, thanks very much. It's my pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So what do you think, Steve? Is filtering your beer anywhere in your future?
You know, I have to admit that at the moment it is not. That said, I found myself reading Dave Miller's book the other night at bedtime, specifically the chapter on filtering, and kind of beginning to have that glimmer, when you're not really quite ready to do something yet, but you're starting to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, kind of ticking off, well, I'm going to have to start kegging, which I don't do. And if I start kegging, then I can start filtering. And if I start filtering, how cool would that be? But at least for the moment, my range top is full. So it's not even on a back burner.
It is a slippery slope.
Yes,
if you're not careful, because then if you start kegging, you have to get a refrigerator or a freezer with a temperature controller,
and that means building a house, and that would make my wife happy, but
but it would be catered toward home brewing. So
that's right.
It would have an awesome kitchen and a basement, but the rest of the house,
forget it. It'd be a double wide
sleeping bags.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about temperature and dealing with temperature here in the Arkansas summertime and year-round down in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I attended a session with Chris Bible, who's a heck of a nice guy and a knowledgeable home brewer as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave a presentation on temperature in the life of beer. And when you think about it, he covered in detail from malting to mashing to boiling to you think about it, there are tons of control points in there where temperature can affect the character of your beer, and Chris went through a lot of detail on all those. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through his entire presentation, but I asked him to bring out some key points in his presentation. And also, another interesting thing is he looked at the way we control temperature today and the way we or our predecessors controlled temperature in the past?
Interesting.
Well, about 9-10 years ago, I decided that I wanted to start brewing. And the reason I decided to do that is because I'm a chemical engineer. I've always loved everything about chemistry, science, and technology. And I'm also a beer lover from the time I was old enough to know what that was. So the intersection of my love for beer and my love for science kind of turned me into a home brewer. So here I am today, trying to spread what little bit of limited knowledge I can with the folks and all the people around us.
And brewing, you do have the opportunity to get into very technical, if you want to. It's as technical as you want to get into.
Exactly right, yes. It can be as technical or as simple as cooking a meal, or as technical as designing the space shuttle. It depends on what you want to do with it, exactly.
Now, you talked about temperature all the way from, raw grain to enjoying the beer.
Right.
So temperature is vital at many stages.
Yes, at most every stage in the brewing process, temperature plays at least a minor role. In some areas, such as milling, virtually no role. Germination of the grain, to a lesser extent, it's important there too, but it is important. Obviously, in areas like mashing, it's critical. If your mash profile is wrong, your beer's not going to be right. It'll still be drinkable beer, but it won't be the beer you were trying to brew. So, to your point, yes, temperature plays a role at every step, all the way from the beginning when it's in the field growing to the very end when you're enjoying it. The flavor profiles associated with the finished product are very much temperature dependent. Volatiles come off at higher temperatures better, so temperature enhances the overall flavor sensation. Lack of temperature mutes it. Basically, right? It's important all across the board.
And by tweaking your temperatures at various stages, you can come up with an entirely different beer.
Sure, absolutely. As brewers, we're tweaking a whole bunch of stuff at every step of the game. One thing we certainly have to have a handle on is temperature at every point. If we don't understand that and are able to control that, then the beer is not going to be the best beer it could be. And our goal as brewers, I hope, is to all make the best beer we can make.
In your opinion, what are, say, the top three controllable points from a homebrewer standpoint?
Right. Well, arguably, they're all important. But you said top three. To me, mashing is very important. The temperature control of the profile of that mash is critical. Fermenting, where the yeast are actually coming to life and doing their things, absolutely critical that the brewer understands and controls and monitors there. And I have to say, for me personally, enjoying is the third most important. I don't really want to drink an ice-cold Imperial Stout. I'd much prefer to have that baby hit me right in the eyes, So that's my opinion for what it's worth.
Now, you talked about one interesting aspect of your presentation was that you said this is the way we control the temperature today, and this is the way they used to do it in the old days. In the old days, not only was there not much reliable control over the temperature, there wasn't a whole lot of consistent way to measure the temperature.
Exactly. The thermometer wasn't invented till 17-something. So if you think back to a time in the ancient brewing tradition before then, there was no way of actually accurately and repeatedly measuring temperature at all. And people relied upon things that they could put their hands on, so to speak.
And sometimes literally.
Dunking the arm in the mash and seeing if you could keep it in there till you counted to 3 was one methodology. I think that you talked about earlier with me, turning the fire off and walking around the field 3 times, another way. So people fell back onto what they could actually see and feel and touch and understand as an analog for a temperature control device. So they just got there a different way, and probably not nearly as precise and repeatably as we can today.
And that brings up another point. Is the beer today an entirely different animal from the beer in the past? I mean, we're doing these traditional historical styles, but would someone back in the 1700s recognize what we're drinking today as beer?
I've got a feeling that anybody here at the conference that's involved with the hobby to a depth of knowledge of any significance would say, absolutely different beers today. We could try to do our best, but we're never going to achieve that nuance of having left it out in the sun for 3 days and claim that's good. Our palate didn't grow up like that. So I think that most of the peers that we have around us would argue that it's entirely different, and we can do our best to try to simulate it, but it's going to fall short. Not better or worse, just different.
Have you heard of or been in any parts of trying an experiment using the old tools or no tools at all in measuring temperatures? Or
No, never have. I've always been kind of on the techno-geeky end of the spectrum, for good or for bad. I'm on that tail of the bell curve as an engineer more than I am the other side. So technology and my fallback on it tends to be a weakness and a strength, I guess, depending on how you look at it.
It might be fun to go back to the Stone Age.
There you go.
Well, I appreciate your time.
No problem. Glad to be of help.
So when you talk about the real classic styles of beers, really probably nobody is making a true classic style of beer from back, before we identified the yeast was the active agent in making beer, and before temperature controls were, before the thermometer was invented. So it would be interesting, to go back with the ancient techniques and to try to brew without a thermometer and to try to, get a spontaneous, which is a misnomer, fermentation and see what you come out with.
Now, of course, you're completely right with that, but I would like to point out that on club night, I was able to taste a pre-prohibition beer that one of the clubs made, and I believe we got that on the video.
That's right.
And I apologize that I can't think of the club name off the top of my head, but the beer was very different and extremely drinkable. So, no, it's not the same as an ancient brew would be, but we can at least taste the beer that our grandfathers drank.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's really a fun thing. And since my grandfather owned a tavern in the 40s and 50s and 60s and was a home brewer during the Depression, I'm anxious to try, or at least to try to get back to the beer that he would have drank. And so I was very interested to drink their beers, and this session was very helpful to me.
So move on to your next session.
Well, our next session was a very nice man from Chicago. His name is Steve Hamburg, and he gave a wonderful presentation on session beers. Now, if you're not familiar with what a session beer is, I'll tell you. It's a beer that you can drink a lot of and enjoy, as opposed to a big, great beer like the barley wine or an imperial stout that you drink one of and you probably better stop if you plan to do anything like bowl or use the bathroom or involving a toilet. I don't know. You just shouldn't drink a lot of that, as good as it is. But a session beer is something you can go out with your friends and have 3 or 4 and really enjoy yourself, and you're not going to just be snockered.
That's right. And you and I have been brewing a bunch of those lately.
Yeah, actually where I'm headed in almost all the brewing I do is becoming lighter and lighter, just because it's more enjoyable to me. I'm much more interested in flavor than I am in alcohol content, for whatever that means. That doesn't mean that I don't want to brew a big beer now and then. I don't want to have a great big stout to have at Christmas time. That's not what I mean. But it's just and plus it's really economical.
Yeah, that's true. Less grain or less extract to buy.
Yeah,
and you can still function. So let's get into your discussion with Steve.
Here we go.
Steve Hamburg, and you're from Chicago, and you talked today about session beers.
That's correct.
Tell me what a session beer is.
Well, it's a very subjective term.
Yes.
As you no doubt heard, for many people, they think a session beer is whatever they like, and I like a double IPA or a barley wine. But from a practical matter, session beers are beers that are less than 5% alcohol by volume, and are meant to be consumed over a nice session. Sociable beers to be consumed with your friends, and in sizable quantity. So I think beers that can be consumed by the pint or by the half liter are perfect, and that means by definition they can't be super strong if you're going to drink them over time.
Right. I was thinking as I was hearing you talk, what came to my mind was when you go into a fast food restaurant now in America, they want to supersize everything, and I'm wondering if maybe this movement toward these giant beers in the brew pubs, which are wonderful, isn't a little bit of that. It's like you go in, you're 21 years old, you're going to have a beer. I want the biggest beer I can get.
Well, that's very much the way homebrewing works. I've been brewing since 1984.
Yeah.
And I went through that same period. Of course, I was a lot younger, but at the beginning, you say, "I want to brew the biggest."
Yeah.
So I want I'm going to. And back then, I think the first beer I brewed was a Bock. And then the second would have been a double Bock because it wasn't big enough. And then after a while, you realize it doesn't have the balance. And, I think there's a maturity that comes as we age.
Absolutely.
And the more we learn about different beers.
So not to really change the subject, but 1984 you started brewing, and what brought you to it? What brought you to homebrewing?
Well, part of it was I liked beer from about as early as I can recall. The first beer I had would have been National Bohemian. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. So I don't know if you heard during the presentation, I could sing the Schaefer beer song.
Yes, that impressed me mightily.
Yeah.
You can sing it note for note.
Well, I didn't sing the whole
song,
thing,
but
but I can sing the whole song.
And you were on key. I'm a musician.
Oh, absolutely.
You were in tune.
But the Schaefer, they sponsored Washington Senators baseballs. That sort of ages me a little bit because there was a Washington Senators.
I remember the Senators.
So I think from there, as soon as I was legal to drink, I really got into beer. I just found that it was something that I enjoyed. But the more I learned about beer, I started to sample different imports. And I got into it when I was a college student, right before I graduated. I had one of these, various jobs on campus, and my roommate and I, we got our tax refunds back. And we said, hey, let's blow it on some really nice beer. So we went to this liquor store in College Park, Maryland, that had a bunch of imports. And we just loaded up. We had one of these little mini beer fridges in the dorm room. Yeah. We got the most obscure things. And some of them were terrible because they aged poorly. They were oxidized. But some of them were really remarkable. So at the time, I think the best there were some really nice Bock beers. And I thought, God, you just don't see this very often. And it'd be really cool if you could learn how to make them. And then I talked to people who said, you can learn how to do this.
Now, to talk a little bit about session beers some more, like we were saying, so many guys get into it, and they're so interested in brewing these giant beers that you just get plowed on. I mean, you're just drunk by the second one. And I would like for you to comment on that a little bit, the idea of sociability and the idea of being able to have a whole evening with your friends and your family and not be, crawling across the carpet by 9:30 might be good for our community.
Well, I think you probably summed it up.
I don't know.
But that's very sensible. Look, for me, drinking is a night out, and I really am a social drinker. I've mentioned in the presentation, I really don't drink much at home. I do it on occasion. I have a glass of beer here and there, and I probably don't have a session beer. Although I usually have them at home, I usually don't drink them that often. If I have something at home, I might have one at night, and you're not going anywhere, so you can have a stronger beer because I like them. Yeah. But when I'm out, I love being out with pals who have the same shared passions, and it could be for anything. It could be politics, it could be sports, which is a common love. I like baseball and go to a lot of games, and just to go to a place with people who appreciate a lot of the same things and drinking really good beers and sharing that passion for something is dynamite. And you can't do that when you're drinking 9-10% beers. It's a very short night.
It's a short night.
So, imagine if you're going on a date and you want to take a woman out and you say, okay, we're going to go see a movie, but about 15-20 minutes in the movie I'm going to leave because I really can't understand it.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't do that. I mean, we don't really think about this. Or you go to a meal, in the middle of the meal, you just sort of say, I can't appreciate this dinner. I've had like 6 bottles of wine. I mean, people don't do that.
Right.
So I think it is maturity. And as we all mature, we go, this isn't much fun anymore. I learned pretty early on that getting drunk isn't a nice thing.
Well, I really liked what you had to say about it. It's not about the alcohol; it's about flavor.
Always is. Yeah. It's all. I mean, we do this for the flavor, and there are plenty of people who drink for the alcohol. The great thing in this community is most of the people who are here, even if they really love strong beers, they're doing it for the flavor. I've known so many of these people for a long time. They're very responsible. They're great folks. I've traveled across the country and traveled to other countries and met many of these people, and they couldn't be better. So they have this shared passion. They're not doing it to get plowed. They're doing it because they really like the flavors and aromas, and they also like great food, and that's another way to go. I think if you're now, you can have stronger beers if you treat them like wine, and you have small samples with a meal, then why not? Right. But I still I'm kind of a drinking guy, and I like pints, and I like half liters, and in Munich I have had the Mass, the big liter. But to tell you the truth, it's a little too much. So a half liter is a good size. I like half liters.
I like the British pubs, and you go hang out on St. James Street, and you drink with some guy from Ireland that you've never met before.
Absolutely.
And it's a great night out.
Look, I'm in the UK twice a year generally, sometimes more, but generally twice a year.
Yeah.
And I spend much of my time there in pubs. So I usually go around Thanksgiving into December because there's an Old Ale Festival at the White Horse and at Parsons Green. It's in Fulham area of London. And I've been going there for years. But a lot of people say, why do you go? I mean, by that time of the year, the sun's setting at 3:30 in the afternoon. I said, look, where I go, you can't tell whether the sun is out or not. So most of the time I'm in pubs. And I love what's really great, at least for me, because I'm not a smoker. Pubs have been really smoky, and they're going completely non-smoking at the beginning of the year. They've already done it in Scotland, and of course Ireland has done it. We've got a lot of news about that.
Yeah.
So, UK, non-smoking.
The place to be for the session beer.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So that was a fun conversation. Steve Hamburg seems like a really nice guy.
Very nice man.
And maybe one day we'll have the chance to sit down and have a few pints with him.
Have a session beer with him.
Trade some homebrew stories.
Yeah.
Well, next week, Steve and I will go through interviews again, this time with professionals. Those both professional brewers and people who work in the brewing industry. So some really good information to share for next week. And we've got enough material for a couple weeks after that as well. So, hopefully you won't be tired of us mentioning the conference, but surely you won't be tired of all the information that we'll give you guys. So, Steve, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, James. I think that this is a great exercise that we're going through. What we meant to do when we went down there was to capture the essence of the conference to share with our listeners and our viewers, and others will have to judge how well we did that. But that was our purpose, and I'm enjoying this process.
I think we did darn good. Thanks to you. We've kind of ignored email for this week and probably next week too, but keep sending them because I'm still answering them. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say hey, write to james@basicbrewing.com or steve@basicbrewing.com, actually.
That's right.
You've got an email. Do you check it?
I do.
Well, good for you. Steve at basicbrewing.com if you want to talk to Steve and, maybe talk about me without my knowledge.
Don't trust him. He's got it rigged.
Just remember who gave you the password. Or if you want to just go to the site and fill out our contact form on basicbrewing.com, you can do that too. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from and give us help for pronouncing your name or the name of your city if you need to. Oh, and thank you to everybody who wrote in with advice to Oz for helping him to find homebrew supplies there in Germany. He's stationed in Germany and was needing a place to buy local homebrew supplies, and we sent 3 or 4 people his way so far.
Good.
And while you're on our site, you can check out our online shop where you can find great pricing on our DVDs and a combo deal to save you even more. And, our DVDs, Introduction to Extract Homebrewing. We walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort. We had a lot of fun making that one.
That's for sure.
You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online. And one of us will send it to you.
That we will.
So that's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer.
I'm Steve Wilkes.
Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time. So long, everybody.